I propose to share my time 6 minutes and 2 minutes with Senator Siri Carney. I welcome this bill. We had statements not very long ago in this House on exactly this issue, and this bill was discussed extensively on that date as well. It's a tremendously important piece of legislation, and I'm not going to repeat what has been said by other speakers about the import of it. Suffice to say that for most people around this country, they find it astonishing that this kind of activity is not already against the law. So we are behind the curve on this matter, and it's right and proper that we should correct that this week, and I look forward to the passage of this bill into law. Can I make a comment about the fact that this is a private member's bill? Because I think it's a tremendously important function of these houses that legislation comes forth from bodies other than government. Now, I recognise that it has been amended somewhat in the Dáil, but for the most part, in fact, to a very extensive extent, the bill that was written by Deputy Howlin with the assistance of the Law Reform Commission stands and will become law. And I think we should mark the importance of that, because all too often I think private members' bills that come from members of this House and the other House are kind of brushed aside. We've seen an improvement to that in recent years, particularly during the last sessions of the Houses, where there was a need perhaps to engage more with opposition. But for both government and opposition members of the Houses, they have an equally valid opportunity to put forward legislative proposals. And I welcome the fact that this is one such proposal that makes sense and has been championed by the government. And I want to pay tribute to Minister McEntee in that regard as well. I think, in fairness to Helen McEntee, she came before the House for those statements on the last date, and I know that she's done a lot of work on this bill in committee. I think it is a tribute to her, and that this has already been said by Senator Bacic, that she has taken on board this legislation and agreed to bring it forward and to champion it in some respect, because it's not possible really for an opposition member to do that to the same extent. I also want to recognise what is in the content of the explanatory memorandum, and Senator Bacic read out the last paragraph of the background section on the first page of the explanatory memorandum, in which specific credit is given and specific provision is given for this to be called Coco's Law. I'm aware that Jackie Fox, and mention has already been made of the extraordinary campaigning she has done on this subject on behalf of her late daughter, but also on behalf of the myriad victims of this kind of behaviour across the country. It's appropriate that we would acknowledge that, and it's appropriate, and I think credit is due to Minister McEntee for flying in the face of convention to a large extent to make provision in the explanatory memorandum to specifically acknowledge this as Coco's Law. It is only a convention. There's nothing to stop us calling it Coco's Law in terms of the actual title of the bill, but that is, I think, much more of an American affectation, and unfortunately I would associate that behaviour in America with much more reactionary populist legislation, as opposed to this, which is incredibly important and grounded in fact and in an identifiable problem. Although it's in the explanatory memorandum, or the fact that it's in the explanatory memorandum is an important recognition of Nicole Fox, of what she went through, and of the campaign that her mother raised in respect to this as well. I won't go into the details of the specific bill. There are specific sections of it the changes that have been made by the department and the government in terms of the actual drafting that's in it. I think some of them perhaps are unnecessary. They're done now. I don't propose to try to undo them at committee stage in this respect either. But I come back to the point that I was making about private members' legislation. Just because something is drafted a particular way, as long as it does the job, it doesn't have to be written into the department style for it still to be perfectly legal and correct and justiciable and functional in the context of prosecutions. And I kind of resist slightly the desire sometimes by the government and by the permanent government, if I can put it in those terms, with the greatest respect to the people who keep the country on the road, is that sometimes the official form to write things in the bill can make it more wordy, less accessible, but no better in real terms to what was drafted in the first instance. And finally, if I could say, just in respect of what I said earlier about the Law Reform Commission, this is a perfect example of where I think Oireachtas members have an opportunity to make the best of what the Law Reform Commission does for us. The Law Reform Commission is a state body, for people who don't know, that makes recommendations all the time about legislative changes. They do incredible reports that are very detailed and bring forth the benefit of extensive research and consideration on legislative changes. They also publish consolidated legislation. I mean, reference is made, for example, in lots of pieces of legislation in here, but they are amended all the time, and they on their website publish consolidated pieces of legislation for the benefit of everyone, and that is free of charge for everyone as well. The fact that Deputy Howlin can have the benefit of the expertise of the Law Reform Commission, which produces reports time and time again on budget and on time, and is remarkable for that fact, because it is not an enormous organisation. The fact that Deputy Howlin, no more than anybody in this House, can benefit from that expertise, that professionalism and that depth of understanding is extraordinary. And I would encourage all members to engage more and more with the Law Reform Commission and take on board the suggestions that they have, bring forward private members' bills just like this, that identify a problem and solve a problem that is very, very clearly present. And I would encourage all members to do that. I think it's wonderful that it's here. It's wonderful that we're making progress. I want to express my thanks to Minister Brown as well for the work that he's done and for coming here, and for all members for allowing this to pass quickly today, because that is exactly what should happen. Gormagat.